It's our 60th anniversary this year, and this is the logo created to us by Nikki, are you here, Nikki? No. Oh, there you are. Yes, so Nikki's created this logo for us to help us celebrate our 60th anniversary, and we're most appreciative of that. Thank you very much. Yeah, take a bow. And I think it's for me personally, I know for our committee, we're really happy to be able to celebrate 60 years of UFO research here in Brisbane, in Queensland anyway. So, and because of that, the issue, members do receive that issue of UFO Encounter. You would have received 282 and 283 this last week. Well, this is the first issue for this year, celebrating our 60th anniversary, and Lee, who's not here yet, is our editor, and I think she's done a great job with this issue. So if you want to become a member, that will be the next issue that you will get. A few things to tell you before we start tonight. On the 19th of February, which isn't long, we'll be hosting James Gilliland here. And James Gilliland is from the USA. You may know him through the ECETI ranch, ECETI ranch. And James has had a lot of close encounters, and his ranch over in the States is well known for having a lot of UFO sightings. And people who go there also see UFOs as well. And James has filmed a lot, but he'll be here talking about his personal experiences, his personal close encounters, and sharing some of the experiences that he's had there, and other people as well. So that's the 19th of February. It'll be here at 7 p.m. We'll be opening up the other room as well. Also, we've got Nick Pope visiting Brisbane in May. Now, we're not organising his visit. A gentleman from, I think it's from New Zealand, he's organising an Australia-New Zealand tour for Nick. So we'll have more details for that for you as it progresses. Also, we will be hosting Donald Schmidt here in Brisbane on the 31st of May. Donald has written this book, Children of Roswell, but his co-author Thomas Carey and Donald have set up various archaeological digs at Roswell with the Roswell crash. So he'll be here talking about that and what he's discovered there too. Should be quite interesting. So that's the 31st of May in Brisbane. Just quickly to tell you, last weekend Barry and I were asked to be on a panel down at the Health and Harmony Festival on the Gold Coast on a UFO panel, and Barb and Rob were there as well. So I just wanted to introduce Ben to you. He's here because I saw him on a show called Invasion Earth on cable TV a couple of weeks ago, and I was interested in the case that he was talking about. So I think it was from a National Geographic channel, but he can correct me on that. So he's going to discuss the strange case of UFO seen at Burke's Flat in central Victoria in 1966. And the case involves a man named Sullivan, who was driving near Burke's Flat when he observed a UFO off to his right near the ground, emitting an unusual light. And meanwhile, the headlights of his vehicle bent to point towards the UFO, causing him to have a near accident. And a few days later, Ron read in the newspaper that there had indeed been a fatal crash at that site, only 2 nights after Ron's experience. So he came forward to the police and reported his experience. And Ben's going to talk to us, fill in all the blanks about that. So I'm just going to bring him up here. Where are we? There he is, Ben Hurle. So would you give him a welcome, please? Hi Ben, thank you very much for taking the time to Skype into our meeting tonight. This is a first for us. It's an experiment at Skyping a speaker in, so we'll see how we go. If there's a little bit of a dropout here and there, well, that's probably typical of council Wi-Fi, but we'll push on. So Ben, where would you like to start? Can you tell us the beginning of the story and how you got involved and what you've discovered?
Yeah, for sure, Sheryl. Yeah, and thanks for having me on at the meeting tonight. I really do appreciate it, and I'm very glad to be first Skype guest, so that's fantastic. Look, in 1966 in Victoria, in the month of April, there was what is known as a UFO flap, and it occurred in early April, and the Burke's Flat incident was one of 3 major events, but there were other events that we've uncovered since around that time as well. So to give everybody a bit of a context about when the event occurred, on the 2nd of April 1966, in the Melbourne suburb of Baldwin, a young man was at his parents' house, which was being renovated, and he stepped outside with a camera to take some photos. And as he was standing out there, he noticed this light that came over the top of him and it was glinting in the light. And he managed to snap a photograph of a UFO, and it's called the Baldwin photo. And it was published in the Herald Sun, and it got quite a lot of exposure at the time. So that was on the 2nd of April. Then 2 days later, on the 4th of April 1966, that's when Ron Sullivan was driving through Burke's Flat. And his case is known as the bending headlights case, and I'll certainly go into that a bit more later on. Then on the 6th of April 1966, the Westall schoolyard encounter, which I'm sure many of you would be aware of, that was documented in the Westall 66 documentary by Rosie Jones and Shane Ryan, that occurred on the 6th. So from the 2nd, the 4th and the 6th, 3 very strong UFO cases occurred in Victoria. Now, intriguingly, on the 7th of April 1966, a young man was killed at Burke's Flat when his car ran off the road and hit a tree. Now, he didn't just hit any tree, he hit the tree that Ron Sullivan narrowly avoided on his encounter on the 4th of April 1966. So on the 7th, we had a death that occurred at the exact location of a UFO encounter. So that's the very basic background on which all those 3 cases hang. And there's a lot of work that's being gone into Westall, Burke's Flat, and even the Baldwin photo is getting a bit of a resurgence at the moment. So it was a very, very, very important time for UFO activity down here in Victoria.
Excuse me, Ben, if I could just interrupt you for a second. Can you just tip your camera back, because we're getting a really good view of your chin. That's it. Yeah, that's good. That's better. Thank you.
That's better.
Yep.
So that's the background. So it really came to the whole time period really came to the fore when the Westall 66 documentary was made. And in that, they do touch on Ron Sullivan's experience. And in fact, Ron actually appears in that documentary if you have seen it. And there's a lovely little animated sequence where they show him driving down the road and they show you the object. And Ron said he didn't know what it was, and that was that. And I thought to myself, gee, that little case is a really great case. There's a lot to this case, and Westall 66 couldn't focus on it because that wasn't their main agenda. So at Victorian UFO Action, we thought, right, this is a great cold case. We'll go and we'll see what we can find out about the Ron Sullivan incident in the same way that they approached Westall. So there was no point us going near Westall because that was already well and truly in good hands. So the first thing, there was a couple of things that we had to do, and the first thing we had to do was obviously contact Ron Sullivan. So through some contacts, I was able to procure his phone number, and I gave him a call, simple as that. And I explained to him who I was, the group I was from, and how interested we were in his experience, which in many ways is quite unique in UFO cases as well. Now, Ron was very, very keen to help. He was just so enthusiastic that he couldn't wait to be involved. So that was great. We had our man. At least he was keen. Because as people would be aware, not every UFO witness, experiencer is necessarily going to want to talk to you. So we overcame that first hurdle that he was more than happy to talk to us about the event. So what did we do? Well, we went and visited him. So he lives in country Victoria. So we hopped in our car and we drove up to where he lives and we paid him a visit. Now, he volunteered to come down to Melbourne, and I just thought, no way, Ron, I don't want Ron coming to Melbourne. I want to go talk to him in his own environment, where the man's comfortable and where he's happy. I don't want him jumping on a train, travelling 3 hours to Melbourne. He's about 89 now, so he's fairly old. So we went to him, and we spent about 3 hours with him in his house, And sitting with him face to face and talking with him, it was really, really apparent how genuine this man was. And to give a bit more background to who Ron Sullivan is, at the time he was living in Maryborough, which is a central Victorian town. And he owned a steel construction business, and they built sale yards and shearing sheds all through the Wimmera and the Mallee regions of Victoria. And he was employing about 25 people, about 25 workers, and he had a family with about 3 or 4 children at the time. So he was very much a respected member of the community. He was involved heavily in Rotary and also the Scouts movement, which he still is this very day, involved in those particular community organisations. So he wasn't a guy who was prone to fancy or even had the time for any of that sort of stuff. So he was a very busy man. So we went up there and we interviewed him, and we did this really lengthy interview with him, and we spoke to him about all about his beginnings and obviously all about the case. So he gave us everything that he had at that time, and we captured it. So we came back to Melbourne, and there's another important thing that we needed to do, and that was around Gary Taylor, who was the young man who died on the 7th of April 1966. We needed to find out who he was, what he was doing, and what got him killed out there at Burke's Flat, because there's a strong association between his death in the car and Ron Sullivan's encounter. In fact, it was his death that brought Ron out into the public in the first place. He wasn't going to tell anybody about his experience. So Gary Taylor's death really needed to be investigated. So we had to find out who he was. So I basically contacted the coroner's court to see if there was an investigation done into his actual death. And sure enough, the coroner's court were very helpful. They said, yep, Mr. Hurle, no worries. His case there was an investigation done. It's now held at the Victorian Records Office. Please contact them. Here's a reference number. So I contacted them and they said, yep, we've got the records here and it's available, so you're more than welcome to it. Now, as I live in country Victoria, it's a bit hard for me to get there. I'm 3 hours from Melbourne, so one of my other team members from Victorian UFO Action went there, and we were able to procure all the statements, all the road accident photographs, including pictures of Gary's body, and we had a whole lot of information about Gary Taylor. And not only did we have that, we also had names of families who had helped at the crash scene. So it was starting to build the knowledge base around this particular case. Now, Bill Chalker back in 1980, who many of you would be familiar with, Bill went to Burke's Flat and did his own investigation on the case at the time, and he spoke to Ron Sullivan and Hugh Hunter, who was the reporter that went with him. And I'll go into that a little bit later. So Bill had done that investigation, but apart from that, not much had been done. And certainly nothing on Gary Taylor had been done. All that was known about Gary Taylor was that a young man had died when his car hit a tree at Burke's Flat. Nothing else had been publicly released on that. So the whole idea of our investigation was to see whether there's any link between Ron Sullivan's encounter on the 4th with the most strange object, and I'll go into that in heavy detail in a minute, and Gary Taylor's death. Because Gary Taylor died at the exact same spot. You know, not 20 metres up the road, 50 metres. He hit the same tree that Ron avoided. So by circumstance, there was an extremely strong association between the two. But the key is circumstance. So we needed to dig in and see what else we could find. So that's the basic background to the investigation, and a little bit about that. But now I'll go into what actually happened, so people who don't know have a greater understanding of that. So on the 4th of April 1966, Ron Sullivan was driving from Maryborough, where he lived, up to the northern Victorian town of Wycheproof, because he had a contract up there which was being completed the next day. And he left at about 6:30 at night, and at about 8 o'clock at night, he'd reached Burke's Flat area. Now, the Burke's Flat area is on the Wimmera Highway. It's a long, flat, straight stretch of road, and it has a high carnage rate out there. It does have a high death rate through accidents. And as he approached Burke's Flat, he looked off to the right-hand side, and he saw what he thought was a tractor engaged in night ploughing. Remember, this was April, so by 8 o'clock at night, it would have been getting dark at that point in time. So he looks off and he sees this light in the paddock. Now, as his car approaches it, he notices that it's not a tractor. And the object divides into two halves. First, the top half is white light, and it's about 3 metres across, and the bottom part is about 1 metre across, also white light. And passing between the two halves is coloured tubes of light were passing between it. Now, as his car approached it, his headlights started to flicker, and his headlights bent towards the object. And I've got some more things to tell you about that as well. Now, the headlights bent, and Ron's natural inclination was to follow his headlights. So he started to turn his steering wheel to follow his headlights. But he realised he was going to be driving off the road. He put in a quick counter steer, put the brakes on, and narrowly avoided a tree on the other side of the road. The same tree Gary Taylor hit. Ron slowed down to about 5 miles an hour. The object joined up again, the bottom came up and met the top at about that speed, and then the whole complex took off into the sky. Ron said he was scared, he was terrified, he had no idea what had just happened to him. So he drove to St Arnaud, which is about another 15 minutes down the road, and he stopped there and he got out and he checked his headlights. And you could see there was nothing wrong with them, so he was very puzzled. And he went up to Witchy Proof and he checked in with the motel manager and he said, "Oh, how are you, Mr. Sullivan? Oh, I had a bit of a strange incident occur back down there," but he didn't go into too much detail. The next day he was a bit troubled at work and he told his supervisor what had happened. He drove back that night, told his wife, and he said, "Well, I'm just not going to tell anyone. People are going to think I'm mad, so it's best that I don't say anything." And they agreed that they were going to keep it quiet. Well, which they did. And then 3 days later, it comes up into the local newspapers that a young man was killed in the same spot. So that brought Ron out, and with that, the whole Burke's Flat experience began as far as the public was concerned. And Ron went back out there with a friend, Hugh Hunter, who was a reporter from the Maryborough newspaper, and one of his young daughters went as well. So they went back out on the day after the crash, and they could see still remnants of the car there on the road. The car had broken into 3 pieces, and I'll go into that more in detail a bit later on. And they saw, and this is the stuff we started to uncover about this case. They saw that at the fence line where he'd had the encounter 3-4 days previous, there was about 4 or 5 dead parrots, all laying at the base of one of the trees. That was the first strange thing that they noticed about it, because to see a group of dead parrots is fairly unusual. You wouldn't necessarily see 3 or 4, you'd definitely see 1. And this is off the road, it's not like they were hit by a passing truck. Then out in the paddock, Hugh Hunter noticed this impression in the ground, and it was a furrowed paddock. It had been ploughed up. So here was this impression that had been into the ground. Now both Ron and Mrs. Saints, who owns the property, described it as a vacuum cleaner on reverse. So it was like a vacuum cleaner had blasted the ground and blown out this this circular indentation into the soil, and when the object had taken off. So here you've got dead birds at the scene of the accident. You've got a ground trace evidence left behind as well, and a very credible witness. So it really did, and for us that's what captured our imagination about it too, and for me particularly too. I like objects that aren't your everyday silver disc seen in the sky. I like objects where people describe as slightly different, and they're the cases that I particularly go after personally. And what Ron described was a very unique object. So that was really, really interesting. So now Ron was visited by the RAF. They did make an appointment to come and see him, and they came and saw him a couple of weeks after the event. And they basically came to his office, they sat down with him and they asked him to go over it, and they asked him to describe the object to them in great detail. And they said, "Yes, no worries, Mr. Sullivan, thank you for that. Yes, we'll get back to you if we can figure something out." He never heard from them again. And a few years after that, he had some more people come from the government. These guys are in plain suits. They came to his office again, and they brought a book with them this time. And they opened up the book, and they said, "Mr. Sullivan, which one was it?" The book had all these different types of UFOs in it. and they asked Ron to try and identify which particular one that he had seen. And they said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan," and then they walked off again. So he didn't have any more feedback from the government other than those two particular incidences. So, and that left him very much puzzled over the years that, no one ever got back to him on what it was. It was a really, he was so puzzled about it and really frustrated that the authorities didn't do anything. So, okay, so how did we go about finding the location after at that time after 47 years? Not necessarily an easy task, but I had a couple of things that helped me out. Now, because Bill Chalker had been there in 1980, I spoke to Bill and I said to Bill if he could roughly give me an indication where it was. Ron couldn't really remember 100%, and his directions weren't going to be helpful enough to find it after such a period of time. So Bill sent me some photographs of him at the location at the time, and the crash tree that Gary Taylor had hit had since been removed. The roads board had pulled that tree down. But there's a picture there of Bill in 1980 standing at where the crash tree was, and behind him in a paddock was another tree, another gum tree, sole gum tree, very much a distinctive tree. And I looked at that tree and I thought to myself, there's a very strong chance that tree is still standing in that paddock today. Yeah, trees by the side of the road, they come and go, no problems, but a tree in a paddock, excellent chance that tree is still there. So I jumped onto Google Maps, and Google Maps is so useful to UFO investigators. And I got onto the Wimmera Highway and I virtually walked up and down that highway until I found the tree that was in the background where Bill Chalker was. And once I'd found that tree, I turned the camera around the other way. There was the exact spot where Ron Sullivan had his encounter. So we found the exact location, and I showed it to Ron, and he verified that, and Bill as well. So we were all really happy that we had relocated that particular site.
Can I ask you a question about that, Ben? Did you notice all those years later anything that wasn't growing where it should be, etc., etc.?
Well, interesting that you should say that, Sheryl, because when we interviewed Mrs. Saints, the landowner, she told us that nothing grew in that spot for 3 to 4 years after the object had been there. Now, 47 years later, there's nothing there in terms of a patch of ground that hasn't got grass on it, because that area now the grass is waist high. When we went there, it was waist high, and you really couldn't tell where the object had been 47 years later. By that stage, the grass had grown back. Now we went out into that paddock, and we, based on the photographs that we had of Ron in the paddock and that type of thing, we came pretty close to finding what I thought would have been the area where it was. And it was completely overgrown with grass. And it had been furrowed many times since that time as well. So
was it always a crop paddock?
It was a lucerne paddock. They used it to grow lucerne, do a lot of hay up in that part of the world, and they were doing it when we were there.
What about with Ron? Did he have any side effects from his close encounter?
Thanks for bringing that up. He didn't have any after effects per se, other than being a bit disturbed and puzzled by it. No incidences of missing time or anything like that. But one thing he did tell us though, that as his car approached the object, he felt like his stomach was being pulled out of his body, and he felt a tingling through his entire chest. So as the headlights started to waver and started to bend, he could feel a force pulling his body at the same time. And to me, that implies perhaps some type of a gravity effect or something like that may have been at play. He also described the light of the object as not casting any shadows, no shadows. The light was self-contained. So there's no light beaming through the trees and long shadows of trees. The light was entirely self-contained. And I've heard that many times in UFO reports. It's one question I ask everybody every time I talk to them about UFOs. Light, was the light contained? Did you notice shadows? And he said there was definitely not a single shadow cast. He described the light as being like a milk colour. So it was a milky white colour. and the tubes of light that passed between the two objects, he described that as being a matte-looking colour. So not a glossy colour, it was matte-looking oranges and greens and purples passing up and down between the two objects.
Okay, I think you mentioned before that his radio was crackling. Did you say that?
No, his headlights waved.
Yeah, I must be. Sorry, I've been speaking to people.
Yeah, that's okay. And he sent us photos of the car. The car he was driving at the time was a 1965 Falcon that he had bought in the previous November, brand new. It did have driving lights on it, but he wasn't using the driving lights at the time. And in our documentary, Burke's Flat, A Tale of Two Men, we put the pictures of that particular car that he was driving up there as well. The car's gone. We tried to find the car. No trace of the car now. It's too old. It would have been turned into scrap a long time ago. So that was a bit of a shame. Now, once we found the location, I asked Ron, would you be interested in going back out there to have a look? And he said, oh, well, it's a long way. I'm not really sure if I want to go. And he's pretty old. And then he thought about it and he said, Ben, I want to go. I want to go back. So we arranged to take him back there. Now, because we'd been through all of Gary Taylor's information as well, we contacted the family who owned the property, and we also contacted one of the farming families who helped at Gary Taylor's death at the scene. So when we went to Burke's Flat with Ron, he hadn't been there in 47 years. I'm standing in that paddock with him. At the exact moment he got back there, my spine was tingling, his spine was tingling. It was just the most amazing experience. And we relived the experience again, and we filmed it, and that's all in the documentary as well. And then that night, we went back out there, and it was a full moon night. We went back to the location on a full moon night, and I stood in that paddock where that object had been, under the light of a full moon, and it was as spooky as anything out there. It really was. It was an amazing experience. I'll never forget standing out there at night in that silver glow. It was really incredible.
So what did you discover from the coroner's report about Gary Sullivan?
About Gary Taylor, yeah.
Oh, Gary Taylor,
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, now I'll give you a bit of background on Gary Taylor. Gary Taylor was an electrical mechanic. He was 19 years old, and he had a friend, Lawrence Boyle. Lawrence was a train engineer, so a guy who drives trains. And they both had a shared interest in trains, and that's how their friendship grew. Now, on that particular day, they were both going up to Northern Victoria to two different locations. Laurie was going to Donald to visit his girlfriend, and Gary was going to go up to Hopeton to visit relatives. So they were both in separate cars. Crucially, they were in separate cars. And they headed off from Melbourne. Now, the boys had been drinking, okay? So I'm going to build you a story around, how this whole thing came about. They'd been drinking. They had started drinking at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when they had lunch together, but they were 7-ounce glasses in those days, so they weren't pots or schooners, they were smaller glasses. And they had about 8 to 10 drinks over about an 8 to 10 hour period, so they were basically having about a drink an hour. So can you argue were they drunk? I don't believe they were drunk. I don't think that would be the case. A drink an hour is not going to make you drunk, particularly a 7-ounce glass. But it does need to be notated that they had been drinking. Now they tag teamed their trip all the way up there, and they stopped. It's not like now, the call to highway wasn't there. They basically went through little towns. At each town they stopped, and they had a 7-ounce glass as they went up. So once they got to Malagal, which is just before Burke's Flat. Hang on, I'm going to go back from that. Gary's car started having some trouble, and it started making a bit of a strange noise, and he thought he was having mechanical problems. So Laurie towed him for a short period of time, but Laurie's car started to overheat. So he stopped towing him, and Gary drove in front of them, and he said, look, if you have any more troubles, at least I'll be behind you, and I can help you out. So Gary took off ahead, and Laurie was following him. Now Laurie had to stop to tune his radio because the radio was starting to get all staticky. So he stopped, but he could still see Gary's taillights in the distance. So he tuned them, and he started off again. His radio went out, he stopped, he tuned his radio again. Now, crucially, he drives along, and he comes past what he thought was an old car on the side of the road that was just there. He slows right down. He thought, oh, that's a bit strange. And he turned around, and then he saw the license plate. He saw that it was Gary's car, and he saw Gary's body lying on the road, or on the side of the road. He jumped out of the car, he had a look at his friend, there was no sign of life with his friend. So he jumped back in the car and he just drove until he found some lights on a house. Now he missed the family who owned the paddock. They only lived 100 metres away, but all the lights were off in their house. And he drove another 5 kilometres down the road until he came to another farming family's house. He went in there, oh, my mate. So the farmer and his son hopped in their car, rang the police at Bialaba, and they went back to the scene of the accident with Lawrence. So now the guy that we spoke to was the son. The son who went back to the crash scene. He was about 15 at the time, and we went to farm, the exact property, and we interviewed him about the crash, being a crash scene witness at the time. So when they went back there, Laurie thought he detected breathing, and he did mouth to mouth on Gary until the police arrived. But they basically then realised he was dead. And what killed him was he hit the tree, and the car broke into 3 pieces, and he was ejected through the window. So he died from a broken. His back was broken, his lungs were punctured, and basically he drowned on his own blood. So that's how he died. So what I want to talk to you about now is the circumstances of the crash. So the boys had been travelling about 40 miles an hour as their average cruising speed. They were not in a hurry, and I'll talk about Laurie Boyle a little bit later. They had not been in a hurry. But when Gary went ahead and he hit the tree at 70 miles an hour. Now, he was driving a Ford Zephyr Mark 1, and a Ford Zephyr Mark 1, for you car buffs in the audience, is not really a very fast car. They were big bricks on the road, take a fair bit to wind them out. 70 mile an hour was certainly at top speed. Now, in the coroner's report, Laurie stated that he thought he might have had the heater on, had the windows up, and maybe he fell asleep at the wheel and hit the tree. Well, the facts of the case don't add up with that either, because he put his brakes on 70 feet from the tree, which is 21 metres for those of us in modern times. So 21 metres from the tree, he applied the brakes. And at 7 feet from the tree, he took the brakes off, and then the car hit the tree sideways. And then it broke into 3 pieces, and he was thrown from the vehicle. So what that says to me is that because he put the brakes on 70 feet from the tree, it would imply that he was not asleep. That would imply to me that he's actually been consciously put the brakes on. So, and then he's obviously taken the foot off the pedal, and he's hit the tree at the point where he couldn't do it. So for him, if he had driven straight into the tree being asleep, he wouldn't have put the brakes on, he would have just smashed straight into the tree.
So is it a possibility that he saw something and that's why he braked? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly right. There's a strong possibility. Now, whether that was a kangaroo, wombat, echidna, fox,
UFO or whatever.
UFO, whatever, any of those explanations are all possible. They all are, including a UFO.
So here we got a crash a couple of days before someone had actually, sorry, it was the other way around? Yeah, someone saw the UFO in the paddock.
Yes.
A couple of days later, someone else had all this, he's telling, driving along, brakes 70 feet from a tree, crashes, dies. And the question is, were the two related? Did they both see something similar that caused it to happen? Yeah.
That's correct. Now, the thing about it is, the thing about that very thing, the whole conundrum of the whole thing, is the fact that it was the same spot.
It
was the exact same spot. Not within cue of it, it was the exact same spot. That's what makes it so tantalising about Gary Taylor. Now, I did find out one thing today that no one in the world knows. I'm going to reveal it at your meeting tonight. In the actual records, there's a lot of handwritten stuff in there, and it's incredibly bad handwriting, really, really difficult to read. And when we were doing all the investigation, initially I just didn't get a lot of time to read the handwriting, but today I sat down doing a little bit of a refresher for tonight, and I was really stuck with the handwriting, and I read it, and it actually says that Gary was short-sighted, and he had to wear glasses, and it was a condition on his licence that he wore glasses. So you've got a guy driving along in the middle of the night at high speed who's short-sighted, and he smacks into a tree. So it's just another factor that may or may not have played a part in the accident. But until today, I didn't actually know that he was short-sighted. Now, Lawrence Boyle, I want to talk quickly about Lawrence Boyle. I'm not sure how much more time you.
Well, actually, I'm going to have to wind you up.
Okay, just quickly.
Yep.
We tracked down his friend, and his friend now lives in Queensland, funnily enough. And the strangest phone call I've ever had to make is to ring a complete stranger out of the blue with a cold call to ask him, is he willing to talk about his dead mate who died 47 years ago? That's a strange phone call to
Yes,
make.
isn't it?
And I did, and he agreed to talk to us. And if guys want to get onto YouTube, onto VUFOA TV and watch the documentary, there's the interview with Laurie Boyle, who was the first person on the scene.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to open to the audience to see if they had questions for you.
Sure.
Yes. Yes. Here, Connor. Oh, have you?
As a parrot fancier, I'm disappointed you didn't give them more airplay. They hadn't been drinking, I'm sure. But parrots do fly, like a lot of birds, at a great speed next time you watch them. Now, if they were distracted, if their vision or their brain was somehow impaired, crashing into a tree would be quite likely. Normally parrots can fly through trees. They make 2-point landings. They don't poke out their eyes or touch one another. They have an incredible brain, but it wouldn't have to be disadvantaged very much before they might all end up at the bottom of a gum tree.
True. True. That's a very good point. Yes, indeed. And I've got another case, just briefly, in Western Victoria where a live herded sheep around a paddock, and they actually found a disorientated wedge-tailed eagle on the ground. So yes, that's a good point, very much so.
Other questions? Yep. Can you hear those questions, Ben?
No, I couldn't hear.
Oh.
If the car crashed at 70 mile an hour, but he hit the brakes 70 feet before the tree, shouldn't he have lost a bit of speed?
He would have lost, well, that's, interesting point, which would imply that perhaps he was going faster. Now, those speeds that I'm quoting are quoted in the police report, so the police at the time have done the estimates on, probably based on skid length, where the motor ended up in the paddock and things like that. So yeah, I suppose you could definitely allude to the fact that he may have even been going faster, which would imply to me that potentially maybe he was terrified out of his brain. You know, maybe he just put the foot to the floor and had the car going absolutely flat out as fast as it could possibly go, and he's got into the gravel. And as he's got into the gravel, he's seen, oh my God, there's a tree coming up. Maybe just capped the speed a little bit and then smacked into the tree. 3 easy parts for the car thereafter. So that's a good point.
Other questions? Yep.
Just a quick one. I've had this happen myself. If your brakes aren't adjusted properly in early 60s Zephyrs with drum brakes often weren't, when you hit the dirt and you put on your brakes hard, some wheels on one side can brake harder than the other and can swing your car actually sideways. So if you're braking the first time and you're on dirt and your wheels aren't adjusted properly, your brakes aren't adjusted properly, you can take your car sideways in just a wick. And that's how come he would have hit the tree if it was all open and the only option was you go anywhere, but while you hit the tree, and obviously if he did put it on the brakes, your car can go sideways in dirt very fast, especially if you're trying to steer at the same time, and consequently hit the tree. Just a theory.
Yeah, that's really good. That makes a lot of sense. It really does, because it was the passenger side that hit the tree first. So yeah, if he's put those brakes on and the car's come around, then yeah, that's the way he's hit the tree, and then it's boom from there. But yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Other questions? Another one?
Just wondering if any of the farmers recorded any strange lights in the sky around the same time?
Interestingly enough, yes, there is. There's another incident. It didn't quite occur in April. It actually occurred in June, so it was a little later than that. But it's another good case. It was a truck driver driving in the Maryborough area where Ron Sullivan lived, and he encountered a UFO along the road, and his truck was pulled off the road as well. So that was in the same year, in June. So definitely something strange going on. When we're up there in the local area, being the UFO investigators that we are, we can't help but ask questions. And the landowner told us about plenty of UFO stories from the area. Even the young boy who's now the farmer, and there's big farms up there too. You're talking about a 7,000 acre farm, and these families have owned these farms since 1834, 1850. You know, they've had these farms for a long time. They gave us lots of other stories of strange lights and encounters in the area as well. So not strictly as you're asking around that particular time, but yeah, there's a history and there's a history of UFOs, strange lights. There was a great story just quickly that they told me about of a farmer in the area who was a tough guy, wouldn't have been scared of anything. He was out doing hay one night. This orange light came down over the top of his trailer around the paddock. It sat in the corner of the paddock watching him at work. It scared him and he drove home.
Yeah, I've had a report like that too. I've got another question. You can actually stand right in front of it.
Okay, very good. My question is, back in '66, were there any airports or radar facilities in the area that may have recorded sightings, even though it would have been very low level, that might have picked something up in the higher atmosphere?
Look, that's a really, really good question. I have to say probably for 66, perhaps not in that area, but overall, yes, most certainly. I've got a friend who worked at Tullamarine in flight services, and I asked him, I said, you guys are on the radars there, do you get strange objects appearing on there? And I'm not talking about, you know, temperature inversions and a flock of seagulls. Do you get stuff appearing on there? He said, Ben, every air traffic controller has either had the experience or knows someone who does. So he says that today. So now why I like the question so much is up where I live here in Gippsland, there was a Rosedale water tank incident where a water tank got drained and a farmer was knocked off his motorbike by the object's power and he was sick for days after. You may be familiar with it. It's known as the Rosedale UFO incident. That's really very close to the Sale RAF base. And the Sale RAF base radars travel right across eastern Victoria, so you can't tell me that they didn't know that the object was there, unless of course it's radar resistant or something like that. But for 1966, where Burke's Flat is, it's pretty remote. I'm not sure that there would have been radar out there at that time. You certainly couldn't access any records for it. That would be just about impossible at this point in time. But it's possible, and look, you know, they pick things up on radars. They're both civil and military, and they ain't going to share that stuff.
No. Any other question? Yep, another question.
Right at the far end of the room.
I was just wondering, in the report there was 2 occasions where he'd been visited by government officials. Is there any possibility that you could track down records of those visits?
Very, very good question as well. I'm getting some wonderful questions here tonight from Queensland. Back in the 80s, Bill Chalker was given access by the RAF to all the files that they had available for all the UFO cases that they had investigated. Wow, that's great. And Bill went through there with a bit of a shopping list of cases that he was interested in. He was interested in Valentich disappearance, he was interested in Burke's Flat, he was interested in Westall, and he found not a single file on any of the, there's files on Valentich, but he found no files on Burke's Flat, no files on Westall. So, it's only 2 possibilities. Either the files don't exist, or they're top secret files, in which case they're not going to be released to us perhaps ever.
Ever.
You can send as many FOIs as you like, you're not going to get that information. But Ron was visited officially by the RAC. They rang him, they made an appointment, Group Captain so-and-so turned up with his friend, they sat down, they spoke to him, their time would have had to have been accounted for and what they were doing on that day. They would have written a report about their visit and their conversation with Mr. Sullivan. That would have been documented. That should be available. That we can't get.
Any other questions? No other questions? Okay. Thanks, Ben. That's been really, really interesting. Thank you for doing that. And I just want to thank you again for taking the time to Skype in. This isn't working yet. Hang on. Wait.
No, that's fine. I'm very happy to talk about the case. It's a great case.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, do watch the documentary, The Bergsplat, The Tale of Two Men, on YouTube. It's there to watch if you want to see all our interviews with everybody. It's there to have a look at.
All right, great. Would you thank Ben for Skyping in?